Looks like we're a go. All right, well, welcome everyone. Appreciate you all joining today. We're really excited about the webinar that we've got for you all. We're just going to give a couple of minutes for our participants to get in, and then we'll get started. All right, looks like we're good. People are joining. So we were just having a little bit of a debate before everyone joined internally here. And I've got a little bit, Jeremiah really wanted me to ask this question. So just for our panelists, a little icebreaker before we get officially underway here. What do we prefer, apples or oranges? Jeremiah, do you want to go first since you were so excited about this topic?
Sure. Well, it's always good to have an icebreaker, and we've done different ones at different
Yeah.
events here. For I've been watching Stephen Colbert this last couple weeks as he's going off the air, and it's one of the questions that he includes in his questionnaire. So it's like, oh, that's kind of an interesting one. So for me, I've got a two-part answer here, I guess. If it's earlier in the day, if it's around lunchtime, is when I'd probably choose an apple. You can put peanut butter on an apple. I don't think you can put peanut butter on an orange. Well, I guess you could put peanut butter on an orange, but that sounds really gross. So I would say apples for sure before dinner. I would say an after dinner treat for me though, I would have to lean towards an orange because I love a good old fashioned, and a properly made old fashioned has a little bit of an orange peel in it. So I'm going to go with both, Erin.
Perfect. Wayne, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a lot simpler. I came from Florida. I love citrus, so I'm going with oranges. Plus, they give you a good, healthy dose of vitamin C.
There you go. Alex?
For my part, I'm also Florida born and raised, and we'll also go with the orange. For me, the peeling is a nice meditative exercise, and then I get to finish it off with a treat. So
Perfect. All right. And I guess I'll throw my answer in there. I actually prefer clementines, so there you
Oh,
go.
nice curveball.
All right. Looks like we've got quite a few already joined here. So why don't we get started if the team's good to go? I'll get started here with introductions. My name's Erin Badger. I'm an account director here at Tevora, primarily supporting our clients across New England. And I've been lucky enough to be with Tevora for just over 8 years now, and really looking forward to moderating the panel today. Um, so for those of you unfamiliar with Tevora, we're a nationwide cybersecurity and compliance consultancy, over 23 years in business. We are a registered practitioner organization designated by the Cyber AB and a C3PAO candidate. So while Tevora provides a wide range of cybersecurity and compliance services, today obviously we're going to be focusing on CMMC certification. Many of you are likely here because you're seeking CMMC certification to remain eligible for a DoD or a DoW contract. There are an estimated 104,000 companies that are in scope for CMMC certification. And as of last month, only 1,198, just to be exact, CMMC Level 2 certificates have actually been issued. So if you haven't yet earned your certification, you're definitely not alone. We're glad you're here. Um, and so before you begin this long journey, I'm sure you're looking for some practical advice on what to expect, how to plan for the certification project process. And that's why we have our expert team here today. So before we get started, I'm just going to ask our panelists to give a brief introduction. Who wants to start? Jeremiah, you want to go first?
Thanks, Erin. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar today. My name is Jeremiah Sahlberg. I'm the principal consultant here at Tevora, which means I oversee a number of our consulting towers, including our federal services. Like Erin, we actually started on the same day, a little over 8 years ago. I've been a
Quite a journey.
CISO in the past life, and certainly have some good stories that I'll bring to the conversation today as we've had these conversations and started to help our clients on this journey. But thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremiah. Wayne, would you like to go next?
Yep, sure. Thanks. So my name is Wayne Perry. I'm the newbie here. I've recently joined Tevora going on a year. I come with 25 years of experience, mainly supporting the federal government and also Fortune 500 companies to obtain certification in areas such as FedRAMP. So definitely looking forward to talking and helping out the viewers to help them on their CMMC journey.
And last but not least, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Adams. I'm been with Tevora for just over 3 years now. I'm a CCA and RP, and I've been the one ear to the ground with CMMC for the past few years, attending the conferences and talking to ecosystem members to try and get the best idea of how things have been over the past few years as the rule has gone into effect and we're seeing organizations start to get over the finish line.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Like I said, a team of experts. So we're looking forward to a productive conversation today. So just one more housekeeping item before we fully get underway. If you have any questions for our panelists at any point, please throw those in the Q&A box, and at the end of the session, we'll do our best to respond to all of those. So with that, let's get started. So first question, what are you hearing from clients that are embarking on the CMMC journey? Jeremiah, do you want to start with this one? Oh, you're on mute.
There you go. Thanks. Yeah, so this is a good place to start the conversation is to understand, the psyche of the customer. If they're starting this journey, it really depends upon where they're at, but a lot of them are feeling overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, this is something new that I should be doing. In reality, the base control lines that are underneath this is something that's been around for over going on 9 years at this point. But they're overwhelmed because it's not something they focused on before. And a lot of times, especially with some of the mid-market and smaller entities, they may not have dedicated cybersecurity team members. Maybe they don't even have a whole full cybersecurity team. And so you've got someone who's maybe a director of IT that also wears the hat here, or maybe a contracts manager that's trying to say, yeah, we've got all these things in place. And it's like, oh, what's this, CMMC requirement? And so there's this sense of being overwhelmed that we're seeing from our customers or potential customers. The other thing that we're hearing a little bit in the news last year, I think there were three major settlements, and this really came from the False Claims Act and some of the organizations that had previously attested within the SPUR system that, hey, we had all these controls in place. Turns out a breach event happened or a whistleblower event happened. They went in there like, oh no, you actually did not have these controls in place. And some of these fines, I think last year there was a couple different cases spanning from, I think, $4 million fines all the way up to $12 million fines for organizations that falsely claimed that they were, compliant with these controls. And so we're kind of hearing that's like, there's this, hey, I'm overwhelmed. Hey, I hear that I'm not going to get my contracts. I hear there's fines. I'm hearing that, from one CEO where they didn't have a well-developed cybersecurity team. He's like, can I just buy my way out of this? Can't I just write a check to someone to become compliant? And the answer is not really. You can't. I mean, yes, you can hire partners and buy tools that support your journey, but there's this sense of how do I make this problem someone else's when in reality, um, these organizations need to own their journey for becoming CMMC compliant. So that's kind of this like psyche that I'm seeing when I'm talking to different folks. For the entities that are a little bit more mature and a little bit further in their journey, then they've got a plan. They're working down that path. So I wouldn't say that's a characteristic for everyone, but there is part of the spectrum and the ecosystem that's trying to figure this out.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremiah. I think overwhelmed is definitely something that we're all hearing a little bit when it comes to CMMC. So appreciate that. All right, so next question. The CMMC ruling has been evolving over the last several years. What is the status of the program today?
Well, I guess I can address this one. So recently, 48 CFR was released, and that's the final rule. There's a lot of misconceptions about what that means in the industry. There's, as I'm sure many on the line know, there's several December 10th dates going out to 2028. Previously, there was some misconceptions that that was a deadline, but then recently, there's been more and more talk about what exactly that means. So just understanding that that's, the dates that contracts are become eligible according to the three phases to start receiving those DFAR clauses within them. So that's one of the clarifications that's benefited the industry and one of the things that we stress when we're talking to our clients.
Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate it. Jeremiah or Alex, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
So in addition to that, we've had about a year and a half now of certification assessments. So we've got, a much better idea of the number of organizations that are already prepared to tackle certification, and how the assessments are running, how the full ecosystem is supporting those, and also shaking out which vendors are able to enable what types of operations, what organizations in their CMMC journey. So we're, there's a real timeline, not a strict deadline, but some real time pressure for organizations to figure out when their contracts are going to come up for bid and how they can prepare for that. But we also have, better resources now than yesterday about, what the assessment is going to look like and what their tools are for preparation.
Great. Thank you. All right. Next question here. This is a good one. Many in our audience are probably asking themselves the same question. So is obtaining a CMMC certification really worth it? And I would say both in terms of the overall investment and really the overall effort as well. Jeremiah, do you want to tackle that one first?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Is it worth it? Boy, that's a business decision for every organization. If your sole revenue is coming from the DOW, then absolutely, it's something that you're gonna have to, invest in. If it's something that it's a small percentage of your overall revenue, then it's something that I've seen some organizations take a moment and say, "Hey, is the effort to go through and get these controls in place worth the revenue relative to their business portfolio?" The one thing I would say is that when you look at CMMC 95, I'm picking the number 95, it's an arbitrary number here, but a majority of the controls for achieving CMMC level 2, based upon the NIST 800-171 framework, are just good standard practices to have in place within an organization. There are a couple of them that are a little bit nuanced and focused within the DoD space, but anyone who's looking to build their cybersecurity program can, if you're a cyber leader in your organization or you're maybe the IT manager that's looking to mature your program, certainly adopting this as a minimum criteria for bolstering your security budget, it becomes really an opportunity in my mind for saying, hey, yeah, we have to do this. We can help level up our posture as an organization. So the big answer to the question there, Aaron, is I'd say yes. Is it worth it? But as all things, it does take investment. It takes time. It takes some energy to go through it. So if your business is dependent upon government contracts, absolutely. If you're just maybe flirting with the DoD contracts and you don't want to have a secure program, then maybe it doesn't make sense. But by and large, I'd say, yeah, it does make sense to invest in this direction.
Yeah. So you're saying really at the end of the day, it comes down to sort of an ROI exercise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say building on what Jeremiah pointed out, to properly embrace the CMMC program, I think organizations should look at it more as a business development function to their business. It's going to be something that enables them to reach out and capture some exclusive contracts. And there's also already evidence out there that shows that early adopters are already seeing that high ROI based on the fact that there's a small number of DIB partners that are CMMC certified versus the demand pool for certified suppliers.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Wayne. All right, moving on then. Next question. Kind of along those lines where we're talking about ROI, right? How much should an organization look to budget, and what are the ongoing costs to sustain a CMMC compliant program?
As a salesperson, Aaron, you're always asking me to give pricing in public, and we're in a webinar here. I'm not giving actual pricing. I appreciate the question. No, I never.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right.
I never, I tell the sales team don't share pricing on, until you've got all the, business criteria, scope, and all that other stuff. So I'm gonna, listen to my own words here, not actually give you a dollar value answer, but rather talk about the components that go into it to help size out, a budgetary effort that goes with this. And it really depends upon a couple things. What is the size and complexity of the organization? Some organizations where you've already invested in a mature program, it can be a much easier uplift. For organizations that maybe they have not invested in their cybersecurity program, then there's certainly going to be a larger lift. We always talk about it from what's the assessment cost? People are coming to us, hey, can you do gap assessment? What's it cost to do a full assessment? What's the remediation? But that, the total cost for going through this program is certainly, understanding your current state, typically a gap assessment. The remediation can be a large effort of the budget. Sometimes you have to implement new technologies. Hey, I've got to use FIPS 140-2 validated cryptographies. I may have to make some technical changes, may have to actually deploy some technology within the organization. Then I have to go through and maybe get a mock assessment coupled with a full compliance assessment as an organization if you're looking for the actual certification with level 2. If we're dealing with level 1, then it's just, hey, I got these 15 controls in place. So I think the question has to really be broken in. Are we going after level 1 or level 2 certification, depending upon is it just federal contract information or if there's CUI within the environment? What's the current state of the environment, how complex it is? And really, is there technical debt that the organization has? Or can you go to an enclave where you can just, hey, deploy a net new solution? That's probably one of the biggest strategy discussions we get roped into is, hey, do I need to uplift this environment or can I create an enclave over here, wrap it in the enclave, and then it can be less expensive. But it really just depends, does that model support your business? Can I keep the CUI in this enclave, or do I need to keep my CUI that's a part of my machine shops that's tied into these CNC devices that's now roping in this, on-prem requirement? So I hate to, in this moment, give you a it depends answer, but and you need to stop picking on me. You have to ask some more questions for the rest of this team too at some point, but okay.
All right, well, then I'll pivot to Wayne. Any comments on that?
No, I mean, I agree with Jeremiah. It definitely, it's very hard to discern what the amount of time is for one client versus the next. Highly variable. Definitely depends on their maturity, and scoping. So, yeah, I think, scoping is paramount in this whole exercise, and getting that right, really drives the rest of the effort. So.
Absolutely. And I know, Jeremiah, you said not to pick on you, but I want to kind of go back to a comment you made about sort of that remediation phase and, potentially implementing new technologies. And so I'm just thinking about a conversation I had with a defense contractor the other day going through this process, and it came around to like some of the tools that they needed to implement. For example, if you outsource your SOC, right? Are there certain considerations that you need to take when evaluating those tools that may or may not meet the requirements for CMMC?
100%. I'll probably kick the ball over here to Alex in a second to talk about some of the, we do have a cheat sheet internally of, free solutions for different things from trainings and others, and considerations on what's a lower cost impact. But using if you're using a cloud service provider for something within your ecosystem that is going to hold the CUI, whether or not they are FedRAMP certified, and you're extending your data into their environment, becomes a costly investment for some organizations that maybe haven't had the forethought to think about this and understand some of the criteria that's been pushed out there over the last several years. So I would kind of say the investments that are needed, there's your own tech for what you can manage, but looking at whether or not your third-party vendors, are they a cloud service provider or are they an external service provider? And I think there's a nuanced difference there, and maybe I'll give Alex an opportunity to kind of talk both through CSP versus ESP, as well as some other things that you have to consider in costs for when there's remediation efforts that need to be done by an organization.
Sure. Yeah. So I think Jeremiah accurately covered it, but just to rehash it, any external party under the CMMC 32 CFR rule is going to be considered an external service provider, an ESP, and then there are further broken up creatively into ESP, CSPs, and ESP not CSPs. And the difference is that those ESPs handling CUI in a cloud environment do need to be FedRAMP authorized. But importantly, if they're handling just security protection data, so maybe your SIM or your vulnerability management data, that does not have to be FedRAMP moderate authorized. It does still need to meet the applicable control requirements in terms of access control, flow enforcement, but there's not that additional cost increase in order to get into a FedRAMP authorized environment. And there are other important cost saving measures, and this is stepping a bit into the later scoping discussion. But the DoD has laid out a very specific way that you can configure connections to cloud assets where you only allow for a video stream. You don't allow any type of copy paste, any type of screen capture or video recording. And that allows you to remove your enterprise assets from scope, which can reduce your remediation costs, your compliance and documentation burden if you're purely looking at a cloud system versus a hybrid cloud and enterprise system. But at the end of the day, the solution that you pick has to work with your operational requirements. There's many companies that'll sell you a nice compliant box, but if you can't get the documents out of your box and remain compliant in order to actually do the work, then you can certify that box, but you can't deliver on the contracts that you win with it.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, that's a really good point. Awesome. Let's go to the next question then. What does the CMMC journey look like for a contractor, and how long does it take to go through that process? So Wayne, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, sure. So again, scoping is the theme here. So as we've pointed out several times, the journey varies significantly by the client, and it can be quite rigorous and daunting depending on their scope, complexity, and maturity. With that said, it's best not to approach CMC as a single project, but rather phases. I find it funny that they call it the cybersecurity maturity model certification when really it's like an organizational maturity model certification. So, I'm sure many clients have discovered that the hard way. So we typically see 5 phases: discovery and system boundary, architecture design, implementation, mock assessment, and then finally the independent C3PO assessment. But again, discovery is the most critical phase and where the journey really starts to take shape. Uh, on a recent engagement with a large AEC construction firm, we spent a significantly more time than we anticipated during that initial phase, doing workflow walkthroughs, business unit by business unit, asking people to describe how they work today in plain language. Why that's so important, you don't want to make any assumptions when you walk in on these client engagements. We did not assume that any controls existed. The answers that were told to us were CUI fault flow. What we really wanted to discover is where CUI flowed and that told us what to build. So this step can't be fast tracked and it requires diligence as it sets the direction and tone for the subsequent activities. So with that said, a realistic timeline is typically 9 to 15 months. I've heard, some cases of things, some organizations getting through it in 5 months, but those are highly mature and very simple environments. But for most mid-sized organizations, definitely 9 to 15 months is what I would bank on. And then that assumes that leadership is engaged and there's reasonably contained CUI footprint. So the variables that move the date left or right are definitely the scope size, how much of the environment touches CUI, and organizational readiness. And two things that compress or stretch that timeline more than anything else is first the scoping discipline up front, and then every asset you keep out of the boundary is remediation that you never have to do. So certainly looking for opportunities to de-scope where possible. And then second, the cloud tool inventory. If a tool has FedRAMP authorized, such like Alex pointed out, then there's a government variant. The migration can be very smooth and sometimes often just switching licenses. So definitely looking for those opportunities as well. But with that, Jeremiah, you have any additional
Yeah, I'll,
comments?
I'll take the other. So I think you gave a very realistic for some of those mid but complicated environments, and someone who maybe doesn't know where their data always flows and hasn't tackled this. I'm gonna give a kind of a different end of the spectrum answer. I did work very closely with a firm who was fairly mature on their CMMC journey, or just their cybersecurity program journey. They were already ISO certified, and because they had a foundation that they had built upon, they had rigorous processes where their data flowed. Uh, we came in and within 2 months were able to identify the gaps of what they needed to add into there. They had to develop an SSP to go with it, but got them up and running, and they went out and got them through their certification assessment, 100% first try, no issues at all. So I think it really comes back to the point of how long does it take? It really depends on how much you've already invested in your cybersecurity program. Again, a good chunk of these controls are just table stakes for a mature program, and if you've already invested in those, you're probably done a good chunk of the work. But if you haven't, then you've got more work to do, and it'll take a little bit longer.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. So this kind of goes back to what you all have touched on already a little bit in each of your responses, but really the important question, how does an organization properly scope for CMMC? Where to start and what are kind of the first steps?
I said don't ask me questions, but I'm going to jump in here so I can answer it easily, and then let the other two gentlemen give a more complete
You
answer.
can't help yourself from taking the spotlight, can you? Kidding,
Oh,
only
you know
kidding.
me too well, Erin. So I'll give it the dumbed down version that I think will turn into a little bit of a more of a discussion. Is first off, where is your so there's level one, and I'm assuming everyone's here because they've read something about CMMC. They understand level one, maybe level two, and if they don't, where is your federal contract information? Following that in your environment, and then secondarily, following where your CUI is within your environment, as Wayne had talked about that through that process. But knowing that those can have two distinct paths within your organization, and what your FCI scope is may be different than your CUI scope, and then think about those as two different approaches for certification. Where do I have to submit my SPURS score for my FCI? Where do I have to do my either annual or certified assessment for my CUI? So I don't know if anyone else wants to build on that, but I would say, follow those two things. How do they come into your organization? who touches them, and where it goes. That's kind of the cheap, easy answer. I'll let the others kind of chime in with some more details about what does scoping really mean.
Yeah, I can hop in and build on that. So that's there's often even a step zero before following the FCI and CUI, which is to figure out what your FCI and CUI are. The DoD is not consistent about uh, identifying all of the CUI. So sometimes it is specified within the contract. There should be a CUI data sheet that describes what you are meant as an OSC to treat as CUI. And then, ideally the CUI is also properly marked, but that can often be a discussion in and of itself that may involve the contracting officer to ensure that you're clear on what that data is. From there, CMMC is an asset-based assessment scope. So based on where the FCI and CUI flows, as well as the other assets that are, on the same network or within the same system, even if they're not involved in those processes, that all is going to contribute to your scope. And the CMMC establishes a couple of different asset categories that all have different assessment requirements. So anything CUI has, of course, the 110 NIST 800 171 requirements, but then, if it's not handling CUI, but just protecting CUI, it has a smaller scope, and then devices that are connected to those, but not meant to handle CUI, those have a primarily documentation based, but a different scope. So it's important to ensure that you have the expertise to properly categorize so that you're fully aware of the requirements and the obligations for all of these assets, and then you can look at the process and see where can we remove some of these assets in order to reduce the time, effort, and budget required to achieve compliance.
Yeah, and
Thanks, Alex.
as Alex
Oh, go
pointed
ahead.
out, another important aspect of that is the flip side is understanding what isn't CUI. So oftentimes, folks need to recognize that commercial off the shelf type of information is not considered CUI. So in those circumstances, it's very important that we look for, again, opportunities to say, you know what, we initially thought this was CUI, but you know what, it actually isn't. So we can de-scope this whole information system or workflow or data flow or what have you. So just recognizing that if something's publicly available, if it's something that you can go and buy, at your at the local Walmart, Target, whatever, or the equivalent, then that's no longer considered CUI. CUI only applies to government-specific type of technical information that isn't commercial or openly available to the public.
Great point. Great point. Thanks, Wayne. And thanks, Alex, as well. All right, let's move on to the next question here. From your perspective, what are the top 3 technical challenges with meeting CMMC criteria? So, Alex, why don't we start with you on this one?
Sure. As a CCA, I've got a couple of pretty specific challenges, and maybe Wayne and Jeremiah will zoom out from there. But FIPS 140 is one of the top challenges that I see organizations run into. The first is FIPS validated versus FIPS compliant, where they sound equivalent, but FIPS validated is what's required. It means that all of the components have been evaluated together and given the green light versus just the piece parts. And what's challenging about it is that each appliance or each system typically has a custom way to check for and then enforce FIPS mode to ensure compliance. So it can be a manual and an extended effort rather than flipping one switch or adding one technology that's going to cover you the way that some other controls can. A second challenge that organizations often work with is establishing system baselines, where many organizations will just apply the recommended defaults over the lifetime of their organization, and then they have you know a a huge baseline that they've never specifically reviewed. It's all additive, and slowly tackling um, the debt of reviewing everything that has been put in place, ensuring that it both addresses security requirements as well as operational requirements, is an extended compliance project. And the final one is system scanning. So a lot of modern malicious code scanners are focused on real-time file scanning, but there is still a specific CMMC requirement to have full or not full system scans, but to have periodic system scans in addition to that. That requires um, configuration. It's rarely a default, and then ensuring that you are scanning strategically to still cover the handful of vulnerable areas where those periodic scans are really bringing some security to the equation, while not crippling the system with a full scan that is redundant with your real-time efforts. Requires some tuning and effort. Wayne or Jeremiah, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. Three challenges. I say you already gave three, so I think I should be off the hook here. But if you want me to give three more, I'll add my own flavor to this. I think we talked about it a little bit, but scoping is a challenge for organizations. We talked about that, but I think getting the head wrapped around that it's okay to have different boundaries for your FCI versus your CUI. It's like, oh, here's my contract information. Well, you don't have to have all the CUI, controls in place for your FCI if you're willing to create different strategies for how you're handling FCI versus CUI. Another one, I was at a conference talking to someone and he was very new to it. He's like, oh, I see that there's this tool. They say if I buy this tool, I'll be compliant. And it's like, tools are an important part of, the solution, but you can't just buy a tool to be compliant and you're done. And so there's for the less mature, that's definitely a challenge. But one that I think really came up in discussion is with these business owners that have not invested in having cybersecurity teams or cybersecurity leadership they don't have a governance program in place. And so there's not someone to govern the process or govern the process and that also understands the technology. So it's one of those, you need someone who gets both. Hey, I have to do these things. I have to have continuous monitoring capabilities. I have to have these activities go in place, but understand how that affects the actual operations of the organization. Sometimes they're like, hey, they're just happy to get a contract and go build some stuff that actually can be plugged into some apparatus that gets attached to a tank or a battle, or whatever it is. So I think just that knowledge gap there becomes the technical challenge that I've seen recently.
Yeah, Wayne, do you agree, disagree? Anything you want to add there?
Absolutely, I agree. But I'm gonna flip-flop again. And before I was talking about overscoping, now I'm gonna talk about underscoping. So, definitely one thing that I've discovered working with some of these more complex environments is that, in the manufacturing, construction, and in AEC space, operational technology in those environments where, oftentimes they're overlooking where their CUI is flowing, particularly when it comes to CUI adjacent data flows, such as coordinates, technical specs, diagnostics, telemetry, and engineering data. So making sure that we capture those is definitely one of the challenges. Addressing specialized assets. Alex touched on some of the asset categories. Specialized assets and CUI assets are particularly challenging because essentially those systems don't lend well to traditional endpoint protection and things like that. So where those systems are maintained by OEMs and cannot be supported by the security tooling, they don't integrate into the enterprise's security stack. So those scenarios often require creative compensating controls such as proxy access, jump boxes, segmented enclaves, or VDI-based access models. So bringing a RPO like Tevora in to help with those unique use cases is certainly helpful for the clients. And then finally, organizations also need to remember that the CMMC program isn't just purely technical. I know we're talking about technical challenges, but there's a whole other aspects that need to be covered, such as the operational, managerial, physical, and personnel security safeguards that need to be put in place. Along with those safeguards, they need to be, there's a documentation component to it. So those documents need to be well written, tested, and defensible for when they go through their independent assessment.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Good point that it's not, just a purely technical exercise there. So, perfect. Let's move on to the next question then. We've got a couple left here. What are some of the biggest surprises that our clients are seeing during assessments? Alex, you want to tackle that one first? So you come
Sure.
off mute.
Uh, it's it's surprising for clients, but unsurprising for us is once again relates to scope. It 3.1.22, which is control public information. While most of the controls are going to be scoped to those different asset categories, as we've talked about, this one control does reach outside of those scopes, and it's going to look at all of the public systems controlled by an organization. So mostly, websites as well as any other hosted press releases or other information. So now, for most organizations, their marketing team now has some involvement in the CMMC journey. In that, they need to have a basic understanding of FCI and CUI to ensure that they're not putting it out the door. And then there's also a requirement for organizations to perform a look back, make sure that anything on the websites that they posted previously doesn't have any FCI or CUI, and that includes pictures. So you can have a nice video walkthrough of one of your offices or workspaces, and if there's something on a computer screen or on a desk that might be CUI, that's a non-text based way that there could be spillage of that information.
I love that. When in doubt, blame sales and marketing, right, Alex?
Is that what I said? Maybe. Another surprise is encryption at rest. The relevant control simply says protect the confidentiality of CUI at rest, and most people interpret that as using encryption, but that can also be done using physical protections. So a data center with proper physical protection access control, does fulfill the requirements to protect the CUI at rest. And where encryption becomes mandatory is going to be, for devices that are out in the world, so laptops, mobile devices. And then whenever there's encryption, that's when your FIPS validation requirement comes in. And that's a surprise to many organizations who are really getting into the weeds trying to get that FIPS validated encryption into their network backup within their data center. From CMMC Rev 2 perspective, that's not something that they need to invest time in from a compliance perspective.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to also add to what Alex just pointed out about encryption at rest and FIPS validation and things like that. Particularly when dealing with construction type environments and clients that have field operations and things like that, FIPS also has physical components to it. So some part of the physical or the FIPS validation is also the assessment of the hardware and the cryptographic modules against specific tamper resistance and tamper evidence standards. So that's an important aspect that is often overlooked is look for that FIPS validation when it comes to this physical security as well.
Good point. Thanks, Wayne. Jeremiah, do you have something to add or?
Sure, why not?
You came off mute.
For a big surprise for me. So there's a couple things. One, this is an open book compliance test out there. So the answers are within the CMMC assessment guide that stipulate how you do it. Everyone talks about the 800-171 as being the anchor on this. Surprise, and then people go, hey, I go to the NIST website and go download that NIST 800-171. Knowing that there's a NIST 800-171A, which is the assessor's guide, and then more clearly specified in the CMMC assessment guides, that actually describe what it means. And there's times it says, oh, well, NIST 800-171 said this. Okay, read it. All right. It could be interpreted this or this. Let's go to the assessment guide and actually ask what they're looking for. It's amazing to me how many times things are misunderstood from just not understanding how to read the control. And as silly as it says, it's like, this must be documented, or this must be identified, or this must exist. It's like sometimes people will take that sentence and just add a bunch of things to it. It's like, no, it doesn't say anything more than that. It just says this one little thing. So let's not add complexity. Yes, you have to interpret what it means, but sometimes people just start layering in, oh, I think that this is what this means, when reality, it's no, just read what it states. Don't make it bigger than it needs to be. Answer the question.
Thank you. So I guess that leads perfectly into our next question. Which CMMC control is most often misinterpreted? Who wants to take that one first?
I can start with that one.
All right.
One control definitely with the case for being most interpreted is 3.12.2, the operational plan of action control. CMMC does include a POAM, but it's the only framework that uses the POAM in that way. For CMMC, a POAM is all that it does is to bridge a conditional certification into a final certification. So if you have your certification, but you scored higher than an 80% and only missed some eligible controls, then you can get just those few controls reassessed and turn it into a final certification. In other frameworks, your POAM is what you're using to manage the ongoing improvement of your system. And for CMMC, that's the operational plan of action. It is almost essentially the same as a POAM for FedRAMP and other frameworks. So if you understand those, then you've got a pretty good idea of an operational plan of action. But there's one call out that I'll bring up, which is enduring exceptions. So when a vendor has to release a patch, or a technology is in the process of getting their FIPS, once again, their FIPS 140 validation updated, and operationally you're required to do something that puts you out of compliance, then you can document that on your operational plan of action as an enduring exception. Have a plan to check back every quarter or every 6 months to see if the solution is there, so that you can move it to completion. But that is an acceptable way to pass a level 2 certification, as long as you've got that enduring exception in place where applicable.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Jeremiah or Wayne, did you have anything you wanted to add to that before? We've got about 10 minutes left, so I
Yeah,
want
I'll
to
have a
make sure
little bit
some
of
time.
a point on one thing. It's kind of building on what Alex had mentioned before about the requirement around marketing in teams and checking websites. And in talking with a company down in Texas, they had hired a fresh out of college person to be their social media, um, you know, liaison to talk about publishing content and stuff out there. And so we're talking about the marketing team. How do you scrub your content for CUI? I said I need to talk to everyone who puts that out there. And so we talked to the VP of marketing. Well, the website's maintained by this person. Our social media is actually maintained by this other individual. So I said, okay, well, we need to go talk to both of them to understand, what's the process to understand. So talk to the social media person. So how do you make sure you don't have CUI in any of your social media posts? What's CUI? Okay. So I'd say not, I don't know if it's a misrepresentation or just knowing that, people have to be trained on what this stuff is. So it's like, all right, let's go through what is CMMC, what is CUI, what are things that we're putting out there to promote the company, and is there a way to make sure that the things that you push out there. So I would say the social media aspect of marketing still needs to be thought through as a marketing channel when it's used to publish stuff about the organization, specifically if you're trying to reference contracts and other things that you've recently won. So I think there's this legacy idea of press releases and websites, but the misrepresentation is media is different now. Media goes through these other channels that need to be considered as vehicles on how CUI could inadvertently get shared.
Yeah, and I'll just bounce off of what Alex pointed out earlier about the enduring exception. One thing to remind clients is that CMMC is just another variant of a risk managed framework. So essentially, when it comes to these type of situations, when in doubt, document and provide justification. That's going to get you a long way when it comes to the assessment. So, anytime you're in question, what do we do with this? We can't handle it. Definitely document it, provide that justification, present that to the assessor because what they want to see is that you've actually addressed and acknowledged the risk, versus ignoring it. So that would be my takeaway from that.
Thanks, Wayne. Really great points, everyone. Appreciate that. So we're getting sort of towards the end here. So I want to pivot and make sure we have time we've got a couple audience questions that came in. So I'm going to, let me just take a quick look here. So our first audience question, what stringency should security protection assets be assessed against CMMC practices? Are they required to adhere to all practices or only the practices they are related to? For example, a SIM solution against monitoring practices or data encryption practices. Who wants to tackle that one?
I can start. So with respect to security protection assets, well, number one, it depends. If the security protection asset is capable of decrypting or seeing, let's say, CUI in clear text, then all the controls apply. If it is, just seeing security protection asset type of data, telemetry data, vulnerability data, things like that, then only those controls that apply to the function that is providing or need to be evaluated.
Thanks, Wayne. Appreciate it. All right, let's see. We've got another one here that came in. We are already doing / maintaining SOC 2 and FISMA. What, if any, are any deltas that you see in CMMC level 2 assessment?
I'll speak to this a little bit. So there is definitely some difference, but there is some core components that will get you there. CMMC NIST 800-171 is definitely biased towards the control implementation end of the spectrum for these frameworks. Whereas I would say FISMA, if you think about NIST 853, much more policy and procedure oriented in general. for those frameworks. So while it can be certainly a good foundation, and certainly there is some crosswalks and overlay between the two. Um, there is it will get you a good chunk of the way there, more so on the FISMA side. SOC 2, it will depend upon what trust criteria that you've already invested in. You've got your security, privacy, integrity, confidentiality. It really depends on which availability, which of those control trust principles you've looked at as part of your SOC 2. But there will probably be a bigger gap if with the SOC 2 attestation. Um, but there's some good foundational building that goes on with that. You'll have a little bit more of an alignment with the FISMA, but just because you're compliant with 853 doesn't guarantee compliance with 800-171. So still work that could be done within the organization. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah kind of touched on this, but when you think about the traditional security triad of confidentiality, integrity, availability that is covered under many of the other frameworks, we need to remind ourselves that with CMMC, it's primarily just the confidentiality and the data flows. So there's talk about this expanding out in the future, but currently that's what the focus is.
So I think we might have time for one or two more. Let's see here. This is a good one. How can I use AI to expedite my certification process? For example, can I use Copilot to help me write my CMMC SSP?
Copilot, no. Claude, no, no. We can get an argument about which AI platform is better and what. No, yes. I mean, no. The answer is I don't. Using AI to write the SSP would it wouldn't necessarily give you, SSP has to describe how your organization has implemented those security controls. There's lots of different ways to implement the security controls, and so unless your model has all of the details about your platform, I'm a big proponent of AI is moving in directions to help organizations as a tool, but it does not replace an understanding of what your what you do as an organization. So I would say it might be good to kind of coach you on what does it mean. In some areas, it might give you an indicator, but it will give you a false answer if you let it write your controls because it has to be how your organization's written the controls. I don't know, Alex, or Wayne, do you have an opinion on AI? And
Yeah, I guess it depends on is the application called AI slop, in which case I'm sure it would produce a very good SSP. Now, like Jeremiah pointed out, there's definitely a lot of, there's an art and a science to developing SSPs. And definitely you have to have a good understanding of number one, what the control means, and then number two, your environment and how that control applies to your particular environment. And to my not in my experience, AI isn't capable of discerning those things that well.
if it's written by if it's Alex intelligence, I give it a thumbs up. If he was to write the SSP, but otherwise, I don't know.
Fair enough. Fair enough. AI does not know all, I guess is what it comes down to. Um, well, we're just about at the top of the hour here, so I think that just about includes our panel. I just want to say thank you, Jeremiah, Alex, and Wayne, for your insight today. I think that was a really great, productive conversation. So I just want to thank our audience for joining us today. Hopefully, you gained some, valuable tactics and strategies to move forward with your CMMC journey. If you're looking for more, we're about to release our CMMC 101 guide, updated for 2026, and the clarified CMMC 2.0 requirements. So for anyone who joined today, I did receive permission to send you sort of a sneak peek copy. So just feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to help you out with that. My contact info is here on the screen. And thanks again for participating and joining us. And I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their day.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.